Okay. Well, thanks, Jan Peter, for the introduction and the invitation. I'm just going to speak without a PowerPoint. Change is rarely a consensual process. Not surprisingly, in the short term, at the very least, some will benefit and not others. Change is something we routinely disagree about. We disagree about whether change is necessary, why it's necessary, what problems it solves, and who should have oversight over the process of change. And the question of innovation in governance is not unusual in that respect. One thing that is likely to provoke the most intense disagreements is whether there is a need for innovation in governance and what kinds of problems can be solved if innovation occurs. With those brief thoughts in mind, I want to begin with two observations. One, as we're very well aware here, of course, there's been a remarkable development of transnational forms of governance across a whole range of areas, from forestry and intellectual property to competition law to climate change to fair trade to human rights. There's been a proliferation of what I've termed in the past technological zones, transnational political spaces which are defined and marked by standards and more or less coordinated and dispersed systems of monitoring, forms of accountability, the law of rules, as Mary Laura has put it. Some of these zones are more associated with the work of international organizations, some with private companies, some with heterogeneous collections of actors, some involve the work of the kinds of transnational communities of professionals we've just heard about. But secondly, in conjunction with such transnational forms, one also witnesses the proliferation of what we might term transnational knowledge controversies. This, I think, is a phenomena of our time. The case of climate change is an obvious example. There have been an extraordinary series of efforts to develop appropriate forms of governance, including market-based mechanisms, obviously, to address climate change. But this has had to occur in conjunction with ongoing disputes, not just about the nature of those mechanisms and their effectiveness, but about the urgency and extent of the problem itself, about what is known and what is not known about it, and what is disputed. It would be more straightforward if there was agreement about what the nature or the extent of the problem is, but there isn't. Or consider efforts to develop new forms of governance in relation to the operations of oil and mining companies, an area I've been working on, involving effective communities in consultation and monitoring extractive industry operations. These efforts have developed in conjunction with widespread and ongoing disputes about the conduct of oil and mining corporations in developing countries. Now, here I want to suggest why knowledge controversies play a critical role in innovation in governance. Is that innovation in governance often occurs in relation to problems about which there is controversy, about which we disagree. Innovation in governance may be needed to address emerging or ongoing problems. It often occurs in relation to disagreements about what the problem is and what can be known about it, and perhaps what should be known about it, but isn't yet. And innovation in governance may need to occur to address or manage a controversial problem, or a problem that might be controversial but isn't yet, that might explode in the future. Actually, I find the term knowledge controversies, which is widely used in the field of science and technology studies, slightly unsatisfactory, and it's not the term I'm going to use here. It suggests the existence of a dispute that is clearly focused on a particular claim to knowledge or a particular issue. Here I want to introduce a new term, a different term, perhaps a broader term, the idea of a political situation. And I want to focus attention on a particular kind of political situation, namely those political situations in which public disagreements about what is known or how it came to be known have played a critical part. in which knowledge controversies are integral to such situations. Now, political situations in which knowledge controversies play an important part are common enough historically, but they are arguably increasingly common. The controversy concerning the existence of weapons of mass destruction that preceded the Iraq War of 2003 was just such a political situation. The debates that have surrounded the causes of the financial crisis of 2007-8 and its implications for the regulation of financial markets is another. The question of the scale of government debt in some Eurozone countries and the policies that might be necessary in order to reduce this debt is another. In the UK, the so-called climate gate controversy surrounding the work of the Climate Research Unit at the University of East Anglia, whose emails were hacked, and its very close links to the negotiations at the UN Conference on Climate Change in 2009, or the various disputes that have surrounded the activities of WikiLeaks, or the question of whether global oil production has reached a peak or not, are other examples. In all of these situations, these controversies, there's not only disagreement about values and matters of principle, about political principles, or about the effectiveness of technical mechanisms, but disagreement about what the facts of the matter are, and how such facts have been or should be produced or circulated. Now, one of the reasons why I'm using the term situation rather than controversy is because of the particular resonances of the term in English. One resonance of the term, appropriate enough in the Einsteinsaal, is that situations have a spatiality and a temporality. They are both located and extended in time and space. The idea of controversy or disagreement really doesn't convey the sense of the temporality and spatiality of controversy, its situatedness, its differentiation geographically, historically. More precisely, I want to use the term situation or political situation to highlight 6 dimensions of such controversies and their relations to innovation in governance. First, and this is a point I made before, we tend to think that the production of knowledge reduces the level of political disagreement, that it enters into the rules and procedures that are at the heart of practices of governance. We know in order to govern. But that's not necessarily the case. The production of knowledge is a creative and transformative practice. It renders new objects and problems visible, about which it comes to matter to disagree, and about which it comes to matter to govern or to govern better. One of the reasons why governance is in flux is that the production of knowledge generates new matters, new concerns about which it might matter to disagree, whether it's government debt, pollution, the abuse of human rights, the responsibility of oil corporations and their actions in developing countries, and so forth. To be sure, many controversies are played out within the confines of scientific journals and specialist communities, and probably need not occasion any public debate at all. Yet perhaps increasingly, disputes between experts and between experts and non-experts, though the dividing line is often very unclear in these situations, and indeed is part of what the situation surrounds very often, are played out in public, cutting across the conventional boundaries of science and politics. Moreover, disputes may not only develop about what the facts of the matter are, what problems exist, and how they should be addressed, but also in relation to the credibility, objectivity, identity, political affiliations, and financial interests of experts and witnesses. Whether an expert, for example, is paid for by a particular Western government or by an oil company, and whether this is made public or not.